With the advent of AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and the numerous JavaScript libraries that are out there like jQuery that make it easy to use, websites are quickly losing that slow request and response mechanism and becoming more interactive and faster. WordPress utilizes these technologies, so as WordPress developers, we can use this in our client-side software. I'm going to take a look at our posts widget that we had, and what I want to do is add some preview possibilities so that when the user mouses over one of the items, they'll then be able to see a preview of what's in that particular post. There's a couple steps to making AJAX work on the front end of WordPress databases. The first step is we need to write a function, and this function is going to be registered with the AJAX handler. So what this function should do is it should essentially get some post data, and then it should output something that can be used by the jQuery request. So we're going to write a function tpp posts comments return. And in here, we're going to set a variable post ID. This is going to store the ID. First, we're going to look to see if the post has a value called post ID. So if this is set, then we can go ahead and set it equal to that value. Should wrap that in a rotation. If it's not set, then we'll set it to 0. Since our IDs start at 1, we'll know if it's set to 0 that it's not a valid post ID. So then we can say if post ID is greater than 0, then let's go ahead and get the post and return some information. So I'm going to create a variable called post and set it equal to the result of calling this getPost function. The getPost function takes a post ID and will return the post data for the ID that matches. I then want to write out some HTML, and it's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to give it an ID of post, a div tag, and then I'm just going to output the actual content of that post. And the way I do that is I just echo, and then I use my post variable, and I output a property inside of it called post content. And if you look up the getPost function in the codex, you'll find the definition for all of this. So let's go ahead and open our PHP up again, and make sure after this if statement to call the die method. This is going to stop processing of the PHP and make sure that the only thing that gets returned when they call this action is our HTML. So once that function's set up, you then need to register it with the AJAX engine. So we use an action for that. And the name of the action is WP AJAX no priv, which stands for no privileges, which allows you to access the same AJAX script that we access from the back end, only it opens it up so that things on the front end of the website can access it as well. And then we're going to give it an action name. We're going to call it TPP comments. And the action is then going to call the function that we just wrote. So once that's all set up, we're going to need to go in and we're going to need to create a JavaScript file. And if you look here, you can see I've moved the top post into its own folder because I'm going to create a new file. So it's better for organizational. If you already had a top post PHP in the root of the plugins, make sure that you deactivate it before you create this new directory and move it in, or it will automatically become deactivated. And you're going to need to reactivate the new one once it's in this folder. Go ahead and right-click on that folder then and go to New File. And we're going to create a JavaScript file called top_posts.js. Now before we write this script, we need to make sure to set up our client here with some identifying information. The reason is with jQuery we have to access specific items, and in order to do that they have to be in classes or have IDs to them. So we're going to go ahead and say the class for this div is tpp_posts. We're going to set an ID for our href, and we're going to set it equal to echo the ID. It's a template tag that's for outputting the ID of the current post. We're also going to assign a class for this A. We're going to call it comment link. So those are all defined. Now we can go in and write our jQuery call. This may look a little strange if you've never worked with jQuery before. It takes a little getting used to. If you've gone through our other unit on working with jQuery and the admin, it may be a bit helpful. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to set up an event handler. As soon as jQuery is ready, we're going to call a function. We're passing the $sign so that we can access this shorthand notation that we use for JavaScript. So what I want to do first is I'm going to set a mouse over event for every div in the class of TPP posts. So I specify div.tpp posts, and that will get those, and then we can set mouse over, and then this function will execute when that occurs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called div and just set it equal to the div who's firing the mouse over event. Then I'm going to call a post. So I'm going to use a $sign to refer to jQuery and call post, and I'm going to go to wp-admin/admin-ajax.php, which is that one file. Now there's other ways to do this dynamically, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to do this right here. Another thing to note about writing this JavaScript is that it's very browser dependent. So we've tested this with the latest version of Firefox 3.6.8. You'll want to make sure that you're using that, or you may have issues with it. Action is going to be TPP comments. So what I'm doing now is I'm setting up variables that I want to pass in my AJAX request. The action is going to match whatever I registered after the no priv. Then I'm going to pass the post ID, and I'm going to get this from current div, and I'm going to look inside of this current object for every A object, which there will be one in each one, and I'm going to grab the ID attribute. If you remember, in that A I set the ID equal to the ID of the post, so that's going to return my post ID. So that's the end of my post object, the data that I want to pass. Now I need to specify what I want to happen when the result comes back. So I'm going to create a function that takes an argument data, which will be the result data. And what I'm going to do is say div, which is my div tag, dot append, and then I'm just going to append my data. So I can now close that entirely. And now I've created my post. I want to make sure to return false for that function. And then I'm going to close this entire section. I'm going to add one other event. For div.tpp posts, those same div tags, I'm going to add a mouse out event. And what this is going to do is this is essentially just going to erase the data once it's been displayed. So we can just say pound post, so that's going to refer to everything with a post ID, and if you look at what gets returned, they all have an ID of post. So whichever has the ID of post, we're going to go ahead and remove it. And again, there's always multiple ways to do these sort of things, and I'm just trying to give you a simple idea of how to do this. So let's go ahead and save it, take a quick glance through and make sure that everything's there. I noticed seeing it that I didn't put my ID in the attribute. But everything else, oh, this should also be a $sign. But I think everything else looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and go back into our client page. And let's now set up our scripts. So if you remember from the AJAX on the administrative side, you need to create a function that's going to call the WP-enqueue script method. This essentially embeds scripts into our file. So we're going to call get scripts. So this is our function, and we call enqueue script. We'll call this one TPP posts. And then we have this sort of strange long string here. And basically what we're going to do is point out our current JavaScript using path join and using the WP plugin URL, the base name function, the directory name function, and the current file. And then we're going to specify that we want to look into top posts.js. right, which is our JavaScript. So this is just a dynamic way of appending our JavaScript information. And then we also want to specify that we want to get the jQuery library. So that's all set. So the last thing we do is we add an action for the WP print scripts. And this is what gets executed when we load scripts into the front side. So we'll say tpp underscore posts underscore get scripts, which is the function we just wrote. So that will just make sure that our script gets loaded up every time a page loads on the front end. So now let's go ahead and refresh this page. And when I mouse over one of these, I should now see the post underneath it. But it doesn't seem to appear. If I look down at my Firebug, I can see that it has gone out and made a request, and it looks like everything's set up appropriately, only it's getting a 0 back. This might be because I'm currently also logged in as an admin and it's trying to do some kind of no privilege. So let's go ahead and log out so that we look more like an anonymous user. And now let's try mousing over again. And you can see it does appear. So when I mouse over, I get the post, and when I mouse out, it goes away. And same with this one. So as you can see, AJAX and jQuery work together to make a really fast and interactive site. And you can use it with the loop data or with any data really inside of a WordPress environment. All you need to do is set up a function that's going to return some data, and you're going to use the admin AJAX PHP just like we did in the admin. Make sure to register that function then as an action, and then go ahead and write your jQuery and register that script using the WP and Q scripts. All in all, AJAX and jQuery can make for a really interactive WordPress website.